Here we are, back to the Larry and Gary show. Do you remember, man, when we first, like you are by far out of almost 1,000 episodes, you are the number one return guest. So I think, Gary, this might be the fifth time.
Right.
Because I've always interviewed you every time you launch a book. I've always had you on to talk to you about the new book.
Good. Hopefully I'll get something new to say.
Well, now we're talking about relationships, right? And I love the way your book opens up as far as, doing the work individually, because no matter what relationship we go to, there we are.
Right. Right. You can't hide from it. And unfortunately, I don't think we go into relationships fully in touch with what we're bringing to the table.
Yeah. So let's start there. A lot of people, I remember you being on previous shows and you're always like, hey, we are a walking, talking conversation with ourselves.
Right.
We have a past, we have triggers, we have things that we carry with us, in every relationship, whether it's a romantic one or a friendship or whatever. But what have you found over the years that people continually carry into relationships, but somehow, some way we don't really view it as our issue? It's always somebody else.
Your relationship with your parents.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So, and even if you had a great one, your parents, even if you feel as if you had a great childhood, even if you had a particularly testing or for you, terrible childhood, and you've kind of come to terms with it, just the bottom line is you and I, all human beings, we're just not we haven't fully connected all of the dots that are in the background of our lives. And they're really challenging to join up. They are very challenging because we're so wrapped up in the day-to-day of our lives that we don't see that there's something actually playing out there. And so in this book, I've really, in the style that I would take on, right? Really held people's feet to the fire to say, look, you can keep chasing the relationship of your dreams, but it'll make no difference. And that includes, by the way, just staying in the one you got and chasing the relationship of your dreams, right? Until you fully come to terms with the person who's trying to do that. And that's in large part what this book's about, like finally getting you settled with who is this person that's out to have a relationship and how come it goes the way it goes and how come, because a lot of times it seems like the problem's over there, and it comes to the surface in relationships. But we get right into the dirt in this book. And I think in a way that people can get their arms around.
Do you think a lot of people think that love is not a choice?
Yeah.
That we think it's like this feeling. And I know you've heard this and I've heard it countless times, but I just don't feel the love anymore.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, it's a lot of shit.
Right.
I mean, I think you have to really. I think one of the reasons why love is a choice doesn't really resonate for people because it doesn't feel like one, right? It doesn't feel like a choice. Like anger doesn't feel like a choice, right? The situation of my life doesn't feel like a choice. There are things that are like naturally feel like I had a say in it, right? And then there's other things that it doesn't seem like I have a say. Now, if you take love as the example, right? So love is such an intangible, yet such a fundamental part of our existence as a human being. And it's so intangible. Like I could talk to you about love all day long. It would never get you in touch with it as an experience, right? I mean, I could tell you all about my experience of being in love, and you could just be sitting there like a plate of dead fish with nothing going on, right? Just like, well, great, it sounds good. So in other words, you don't kind of happen upon love based on knowledge, right? So it's an experience. But what people don't realize is if you're in a relationship with somebody, especially at the beginning of a relationship, you are tending it. It's an activity at the beginning. Okay. So you are behaving in a way that makes this thing go the way it's going. And so naturally you experience it that way too. But many people somehow end up off course. They end up, kind of like out of love, right? As they say. And I kind of make fun of it in the book. I talk about love isn't like a basket, like that you fall out of it and you were in it and then you're not in it and then something happened and then I fell out of the basket and you're still in it. And I'm like, that's not how it rolls, right? It's more like this kind of over a period of time, you're withholding and withholding and withholding and withholding and withholding and withholding in little ways that you don't notice, but the relationship's not the same anymore. And you just almost like you can't bring yourself to be the person you were when you came into it. Like I can't bring myself to it because something over a period of time has gotten in the way of it, right? I can't get it out of my mouth authentically. I might say it like flippantly, but not authentically. So it's no longer an authentic expression. Something's now here. And sometimes it's something somebody did or didn't do, or something you've noticed, or some change in your circumstance, but you are not expressing yourself the way you were. You're not. You're different. You're different. And you might say, well, they're different, and I want you to get, that's fine, but you're different. And that's the challenge for people. Like, oh, yeah, I am different. Like I'm not quite the same. And, there's a lot of this kind of, if you take the case that you're an expression machine, like you express, then your life is only reflected in where you're expressing yourself and where you feel like you're not free to do that. I'm interested in where are you not free to do that and how come and what happened and how did you get there and what's in the way. And then if you can be someone who can disappear a lot of that, and you'll see you're a lot freer to express you, regardless of what's happening on the other side of the table.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit more about that. I definitely understand, the journey of, like all of suddenly it's like this euphoric feeling, right? When we meet somebody, we're dating them.
Yeah.
We feel like, it's even the term, we're falling in love almost to the point where you don't even feel like you have control. Yeah, you just don't have control over it, right?
Right.
And I love the analogy of the basket. Suddenly I was in the basket, now I'm out of the basket. It's just is what it is.
And I'm falling out. I fell in the basket and I'm tumbling out of it. It's a disaster. Look, there's neuroscience could explain it in lots of different ways. They would say, but they would talk about the activity of the brain, which I'm not sure if that's happening first or something else is happening, and that's just reflected in your brain. But what I will say is this, and I talk about it in this book, most relationships are based on, certainly that initial level, that this person is some solution for you. Now, that doesn't always work out badly, right? 50% of marriages work out, so we got a 50% strike rate, right? But which ain't bad, But most relationships that you've ever gone into were designed to fix something about you or the life you had when you met that person. Like this resolved that for me. So, that Tom Cruise movie where he says, you complete me, right? Right. And he's actually talking, and there's some reality to that. Like there's something about this person that when I'm with this person, I feel better, right? So when I'm with this person, I feel better about what? About me. I feel better about me. Like I have this feeling myself, and man, do I love you for that, right? And so in this book, I'm saying whatever that thing is, right, that you're trying to feel better about, you should probably work on that freaking thing yourself so that you could go into a relationship fully as yourself without that little shadow, whatever that thing is for you in the pit of your stomach or in your heart and in your head, whatever it might reside. That if you resolve that for yourself, if you actually transform that element of yourself then you're fully free to be in that relationship for what the relationship is, not for what it's providing for you.
What do you think a lot of people do in relationships when how do I explain this? I want to give you a real life scenario. How about
do it?
Okay. I see this all the time. And okay. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
So we're married for, let's just say 10 years.
Yeah.
Got a couple kids. We start a lot of the things I hear is like, well, we're so focused on being parents now. We really don't make time for each other.
Yeah.
We're not intimate with each other. We're only communicating on like maybe high level things like our schedules and what the kids need and what they're doing. But as far as like intimate relationships go, like, and what a lot of people will say is, I just kind of feel like it's almost too late or even weird to try to start rekindling my marriage again.
Yeah.
So we're viewing her and the relationship through this lens of like, well, maybe it's just too late, or maybe it's just too weird. Or if I say this or do this, she's going to think that, or she's going to do this. And what happens is we meander through what just a really mediocre at best marriage, because we're too afraid to bring up any type of we're too afraid almost to disrupt what we currently have, even though what we currently have is not great.
Right.
And that is really common. So how do we break that cycle? How do we get out of that conversation and perception in our own head?
All right. Well, I'm going to unpack a little bit of that, right? So the first one is you got to stop talking about we, it's I. Right. I'm too afraid. I'm too. Like you have to really get like what's talking there is your experience, but it's kind of getting hidden behind a we. So it's got to be an I. It's got to be like, here's the deal. And in this relationship, we don't get along. All right. Well, in this relationship, I don't get along. Well, that's a different conversation. It's a different focus. Okay. But all the things that you're talking about are actually the product of something. The things that you're talking about aren't, in fact, the problem. The things that you're talking about are the manifestation of the problem. What's the problem? Well, there was a point, something happened, and it started in a single moment of time where I'm going like this, and I went like that. And now I've gone so far down the line with that this pathway that I was on and where I'm at now are so disconnected that I'm trying to kind of get myself over there, but I'm too far away from it now. So you have to start to realize that, well, what the heck happened here? What happened? Look in the relationship and you'll see it's there. It was like, oh, well, and I had a client like this one time, this was a long time ago, and they had an experience in the relationship, and they were now 20 years down the line, and they'd been married for 20 some years and children, all kinds of stuff. And I said, what happened? And they said, well, we just drifted apart. And I said, no, let's go back. Like when did it start to change? And it only took a couple of minutes and boom, the whole incident was right there. And it was an incident in this person's life where they felt as if their partner, the way they acted, it left them with the experience that they didn't have their back. And it changed in a moment, but it was very subtle. It was over a long period of time, but you don't have my back became now this space between two of them, or you don't care about me, or you're only interested in yourself, and la, 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 la. And off it goes, right? And once that starts, it's driving a bigger and bigger and bigger wedge in it. So you end up with a manifestation of how all that stuff started. So that's one of the first places I would start. I'd say to somebody, you got to look at like what happened. But more importantly, when you look at what happened, what did you make it mean about yourself and make it mean about them? Like, where did you go with that? And when you find out where you went with it, because somebody might have said something flippant, or it might have been something rude, but you kind of ran with it. So I'm always looking for, the first thing I'm going to look for is the source, like when did it start going off? But then secondly, even if you're not fully clear about that, I think you just have to acknowledge that you're off. Like, hold on a minute, I've gotten way off from what I'm about. And that's what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted to give people like something to get you on and aligned with who you are and what you're all about. And that's often another reason why, though, we end up so disconnected, because we're no longer behaving in a way that's reflective of who we are. So I might say I'm a loving man, but I'm withholding my love from you. Well, those two things don't match. That you are not aligning with the life you're living. And I don't care how many shuffles you make, I don't care what you do in your life, you won't align unless you're operating consistent with what you say, who you are, what you're about, what your life's about, what your expression is. And that's true of any part of your life, of course. But in your love relationship, if you're now kind of shifting and moving and bending and shaping yourself, and what you're really doing is withholding who you are. And I don't mean withholding your bullshit and your complaints. That's not who you are. Who you are is a fundamental truth, right? I mean, who I am is love, inspiration, compassion, honesty. That's who I am. If I look at my marriage and I'm not behaving in a way that's consistent with that, then I'm a faker. I'm not the real deal in my relationship. My relationship has to reflect who I am. Where we get off with that sometimes too, though, is the question, well, why should I? Because they're not. And
do you think
you're screwed?
Right. I would venture to say that most people don't take that step and they don't really fully understand who they are. In fact, I would venture to say a lot of people are like, well, how exactly do I find out who I am? So how do we take that very first critical step first?
I wrote this book called Love Unfucked. And
right.
in this book, I'll give you the literal steps of getting in touch with, what you say you're really all about. I want you to get, like, most people go around in life believing that they're connected to something, but never really truly being clear about it. Like, I'm connected to something. I mean, if I was to ask you, what are your values? You'd just spout out some shit to me for the next fucking 2 or 3 minutes and I would listen. But none of it would really add up. And some of it would be kind of true-ish. And some of it's just made up nonsense. And so you're not, as human beings, we are not organized around something that we have put together, right? It's mostly some combination of past experiences, what we knew of our childhood, growing up, and maybe some stuff that I believe to be true and stuff that I'd read. But very few human beings are going around saying, this is what I'm about, this is who I am, this shapes all that I do, this is, and you can't just, with all the respect and all, you can't just throw that up to God. You have to think and use your, God-given brain to actually think about, well, but what is that for me and what does resonate with me? And, if I say I'm this, does that move me? Am I inspired by that person? And every time I say that to people that, who I am is love and inspiration and compassion and honesty, I get a life out of that. That brings, but it guides me. And it guides me at times when I'd rather be an asshole. There's times, we'll have those moments, right, where you're just like, oh, yeah, I just want to lay it out. And as you know, I'm culturally, stereotypically Scottish, everything's an argument with us, we just love a good old-fashioned argument. But it doesn't always align with who I say I am. And that's when you often find yourself at a crossroads. I have a choice here. I'm either going to be who I say I am or some other nonsense. And that's, if you want choice in life, you're looking at it. That's it right there.
So you're really, really clear on who you are and what you're about. And you've identified those core values, right? Mm-hmm. And for the rest of the world who maybe they don't understand that, I mean, obviously you've got this mapped out in your book. That's part of the reason why I asked you. But for the simplest, the right next thing for somebody listening to be like, okay, so in order for me to show up the best I possibly can for my wife and kids, I do need to find out who I am, what it is that I value, and how I want to operate. So what's the first step for that guy?
The first step for that guy is acknowledging who you've been. Mm. You got to tell the truth. You're not a delight. Right? You're just not a delight. You're not great to be around. You're whatever it might be for you as a human being, but you've kind of become someone that in the beginning of this journey you had no intent of becoming. You didn't no intent. No one starts out in this journey like, oh man, I can't wait to get insecurities. It's going to be awesome. Fear, give me it. I love it. Anxiety, I can't wait. Well, 40s and my anxious 40s. Oh man, you're right. But we end up in those spots. We end up, suppressed and stuck and driven and sometimes controlling and, lots of different ways that when we were a kid or younger, we'd have looked at that man and be like, man, I don't want to be that guy. And then, we end up being that guy. So you need to come to terms with who you've been and what that's been like for you to be this person. What's that been like really, like in the day-to-day living in your life? Not just say, well, not so bad. No, tell the truth. What are you overcoming about that? Tell yourself the truth about what it's really been like for you to be you, this you. And then start to wonder, bring a sense of wonder and a sense of curiosity and a sense of interest and, like, man, if I was living with that guy, this is what that might be like for me. Then you'll get a sense of maybe what it's like for your friends, family, your spouse, your children. You get a sense of that, like, oh, yeah, maybe that's not so cool. Even though you might have had in some instances, had the best intention, it doesn't always land in the right way. So that's the beginning. The beginning is really telling yourself the truth. There's a saying in the book, every great transformation begins with the truth. And it's rarely a comfortable one. It's sometimes it's stuff like, nah, come on. Fair's fair. Instead of just being like, no, I think I'm a bit of an asshole at times. Like, this is not easy to live with, and opinionated or passive or aggressive or whatever your thing is, doesn't really matter. So that's the beginning. And when you're fully in that, you're in the stew of that, and you can really see it. Acknowledge it.
That's got to be painful to a lot of people, ripping the Band-Aid right off. And that probably gives the proof of that's why most people don't want to do it.
Right. And then what you find you're doing in those moments is fighting for who you've been.
By justifying it, right?
Right. So you're going to fight. So you don't like who you've been. You see it's had a negative impact. And now you're going to fight for it. Why? Because you're embarrassed, or you don't want to be judged, or you don't want la 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 la. So I'd rather just gut it out in this shit show rather than be the one who steps up and takes ownership of myself. And I'm going to step up and take ownership of myself, not so that you do the same. I'm going to do that because I'm going to do that, and that's it. And I'm testament to that. Like, the people in my life don't need to transform. They can do whatever they want. The person that needs to transform is me, because I'm transforming my own experience of being alive. And which is the only real thing you can transform. You can only really transform your own experience of being alive. Mm-hmm. Now, in that process, or in that act of transforming who you are, things shift around you because you don't relate to people from, like I was talking to you earlier and I said, my 10-year-old son is this, he's like a soccer phenom. He's brilliant, just a great little soccer player. Football for the educated. But anyway, but he's really, really great. And his standards are very, very high. He's 10, but when he moves with a ball, he moves like he's 18, right? He doesn't move like a 10-year-old kid. Physically, he moves like he's a little man, right? And his standards are very high. And if I'm looking at kind of like some things, I'll train him and I'll say, okay, this and this, and I'm critiquing certain things. But if I keep going down that pathway of critique, their life has a certain direction that it's going, and the training session's got a certain direction that it's going. But if I critique something and then praise 5 things, and I start to explore what he's really great at, right? And explore that with him, and like, oh wow, I'm like, wow, what made you see that? And wow, how come you went there? And there's a whole other conversation. It's a whole other thing. It's a whole other body. And one is from a place of critique, and the other one is from acknowledgement and appreciation and And it's a different experience for him and a different experience for me. Now, that doesn't mean to say I just ignore what doesn't work, because I can get into what doesn't work and talk about what doesn't work. But if that's all I'm going to talk about, that's all I'm ever going to get. So then I need to be able to balance that out in a lot more powerful way. I need to be acknowledging what works and what's great and what's good and what I appreciate and what I like about this. And, that might start with acknowledging how much I haven't done that, right? Like I've been somebody who does more of this or judges you or makes you wrong. Or, like I've got myself in a spot where I don't approve of who you are, which is absurd. You're a human being. And who am I to approve or not approve? And, I won't say this book isn't eye-opening, because it is. And I won't say it's not a tough read, because it is for a lot of people. But for many, many people, I really feel as if it's the read they need.
I would agree, man. You've got this chapter on you don't know your vows from a hole in the ground. So tell us about that chapter.
Well, I mean, I used to do this. Like, this was my party trick, right? For people that wanted to participate, I never picked on people. But anyway, people say, a great relationship. I'm happily married for 20 years. I'd say, what's your vows? They'd be like, love, cherish, some other stuff. I'm like, do you realize that was a vow? And they were like, what do you mean it was vows? I got freaking married. But what people fail to see is that word vow is very intentional. It's not an accident. It's not flippant. And whether you're married or not, you have something very similar in your relationship. That is, there's some agreement between you and others. So a vow is, for all intents and purposes, a contract, a spoken statement of intent. And 300 years ago, when you made a vow, it was a big deal. That was the whole point of getting married. You stood up in front of your own peers and said, this is who I am. And then you went about that. That was it, right? And it was so important, by the way, that once upon a time, there was no undoing that vow. Now, why does that even matter now? Well, because we don't use vows anymore. So no one's vowing anything. No one's like, I'll see you at 3:00 and I vowed to be there. Like, nobody's talking in vows. So it's a bankrupt thing. Now it's just ceremonial. So there's no real gravity to your statement. But if you were to say, well, listen, I promise to love you for the rest of my life, and that's my vow to you, that's a big game. You just gave yourself to. That's massive. That means every time that I feel like I can't stand you, I said I would love you. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to love you right now. Even when you're telling me you hate me for something I did or something, I'm going to choose to love you right now. Why? Because I said I would. Now, some people might say, well, that could never work. Maybe not. But if you vowed something, it would kind of behoove you to occasionally reground yourself in it, to get yourself back to it, and to start from there on that day. Like, okay, I said I would love it. What if so just like when I'm training my son, if I critique, or acknowledge and appreciate, I have 2 different outcomes. The only thing that's different is the way I'm relating to him. So if I come into my relationship and I say, I haven't been relating to you through this lens of love, and I'm going to do it today. I'm going to do it. I'm going to relate to you like a loving man would. And I'm going to have that guide me, even though, I might be holding on to something. I might want to be right about something. I'm going to be guided by something. I'm going to be out to discover you through the lens of love today. And in that day, you shift the whole context of your relationship.
You know, one of the coolest things I got from this book, actually from all your books, is the power of choice. Regardless of the feeling that I feel in this moment right now. I think a lot of people view their marriages as, well, it's got to be this euphoric feeling of love and in love. And if it's not that, then something's wrong. And if I have to put work into this, then maybe we weren't meant to be together or whatever. And a lot of people, going back to your vows, right? Doing the action despite being tied to the outcome, doing the action despite whether or not you feel like it. Maybe a good example of this, and maybe I'm simplifying it too much, is, you know, going to the gym, staying fit and being healthy. It's not like people wake up every single day and be like, oh my God. I mean, some people do. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get to the gym today. Sweat my ass off and, you know, restrict my calories to 1800. So like I have the results that I want. I just can't wait to do all that. Right. But they do these things because part of how that one of the goals that they have or how they operate is like, hey, I'm a healthy person that makes healthy food choices and I'm active. And they'll do the activity regardless if they feel like it or not. Some days they feel like it's great. Sometimes they don't. But on the days that they don't, they're like, you know what? I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do this, right? Regardless of how I feel. And is it too oversimplified to say that relationships could be the same way? Well,
they have to be. I mean, one of the things that you'll discover in this book are all the shoulds that you have about your relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's supposed to be some way.
Right.
Which always takes you off track from how it actually is. And it leaves you an opinion about how it is compared to how it should be. You know, like this is supposed to be different. Like I'm supposed to be different. You're supposed to be different. This is supposed to be different. That's some standard or ideal that you have in mind, which invariably ends up with like your partner ends up being the one that has to do stuff to help that ideal get hit, right? We got to hit that standard. So I'm going to watch you to see how much of that you're doing, right? Which is a big problem in relationships. After a while, we become just very observational and judgmental in them. So I'm not actually participating there. Now I'm just like a grumpy spectator, right? And I'll do a little bit, right? Or I might do a big thing, but it's never for the relationship. It's for this person to be different. So I'm going to do something here. And then I go, see, I'm always doing good shit, and they never do good shit. And why does it work? Right? Whoa. So because that's give to get, right? That's not authentically giving, right? Like if I say I love you to my wife, and I sit there like this.
Tell it to me back. Come on now.
I teach you, right? Are we doing it? I'm not authentically saying it. I'm saying it so you'll say it. Whereas if you go back to what I said earlier in the interview, I said you're an expression machine, and your only real job is to express. But we part of the kind of booby prize, I think, we've been left with as human beings, like the kind of general consensus of agreement in society is, I have no real say in how I am, and the best I can hope for is to find somebody who will help me feel better about this. And it's all BS. None of that's real. None of it's true. You have a tremendous ability to express and create a relationship and shift who you are in it and make a difference in it and have it. But again, not so that they'll be different. Ultimately, it comes down to are you lined up with you, and are you lined up with what matters to you, and are you fully expressing that? And if not, how come, and how can we get you on the other side of that?
I think that's one of the bigger aha moments I had with your book is how often do people express themselves, but I'll do this, but my hope is she'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
You know, if I do this, maybe she'll respond like this. So we have this agenda, right? We don't just express, right? Because that's what we vowed to do. And that's what we want to do.
Right.
We'll express because we're like, well, hey, if I if I share this or I do this, hopefully she will do this. Right.
Right. So the real problem with all of that is, well, firstly, they usually don't. Right. So they don't do, or they don't line up with your scurrilous little plan. Right. But secondly, it becomes, I mean, in other words, what you're explaining is how most people do their relationships, right? I'll do something nice for you, you do something nice for me, I'll do something nice for you, you do something nice for me. That's also called manipulation. So I'm going to do something so that you will give me something back, right? And I'm not even going to be clear about it. I'm just going to do it. And hopefully through the laws of, translation through the universe, you'll get it. And then you'll give me good stuff back. And the paradigm with for instance, with my marriage, my wife, my wife doesn't have to be any way other than the way she is, good, bad, or indifferent. It's not up to me. That's her life experience. So I can't make her be I can't make her be, wake up out of bed in the morning and be great, right? I mean, she might wake up out of bed in the morning and just be like, screw this shit, where's the coffee, Well, that's where she's at, what do you want me to do, right? Am I going to be like, well, I'll be nice to you so that you cheer up and I'll feel better, but you're not feeling good, right? Or I might just be like, hey, I've been there. I know that feeling, right? And I'm not going to do anything with it, right? And if you want me to make you a cup of coffee to make you feel better, all right, I'll do that. I have no problem with doing that. So the big relief for my wife was, and for me was, you don't have to be anyone but yourself. And I'll just love all of that, right? Even all the bits that I don't like. I'm going to like, that's all of you though. I don't get to cherry pick you. Like, I like this part of you, that part, could you cut that out, right? I mean, imagine somebody said that to you, right? Larry, I think you're great, but see all this thing that you do? If you and I want to stay friends or be in a relationship, stop doing all of that, right? And be somebody else in those areas of your life. Don't be you, be more like you over here. Yeah. To extend you're not being you, you're really being. It's horrible. It's brutal. So, and we're kind of addicted to it. I think that's why sometimes in this book, I think people will find themselves grinding their teeth because there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to like, yeah, but what do you do if somebody's an asshole? Like, what do you do with that? And I even get into that in the book. I even talk about, no, I'm not talking about other people. I'm talking about you. I want you to get high. I'm talking about you. But I also get into, you might be in a situation that's just unworkable and you're just living in a complete pretense about it. Then I talk about how you can handle that. I even talk about, how you should break up, which is kind of unusual for a relationship book, but I talk about it.
Well, I mean, I think it's human nature, right? Because when we go about these relationships, let's just call it, marriage, right? Obviously, right. We go about relationship and marriage, and let's just say the person is fully expressing themselves. Like, hey, yeah. I am my most authentic self. And I also know that this person is probably not going to reciprocate their most authentic self. Okay. And I get the feeling that a lot of this relationship is completely one-sided, no matter what I say or do. Right. Do you find that type of perception is usually accurate, or are we still relying on are we still just leaning on our own baggage, still not communicating clearly? What do you think is usually going on? I mean,
I think by and large, there's still junk there. There's still stuff there. I think what you have to realize is, who am I that this person isn't participating? Like, what's going on here? Not like blame, which is where everybody goes. This has got nothing to do with who's to blame. Like, nobody cares who's to blame, right? It's all nonsense. It's like, what's working? What's not working? Why is it not working? And how can we make it work? Mm-hmm. Right? That's what it comes down to. And so if you, sometimes you get in a relationship and you could be married, or you could be in a long-term relationship, could be a partnership, but you might be in a spot where this isn't going the way that I want this to go. Now, that's actually what I just said there is profound, if you think about it. This isn't going the way I wanted this to go. Okay. Now you have to understand that's now what you're looking at. But
right.
This isn't going the way you wanted it to go. Right? Now there's a choice there you have to make. You have to make. Am I willing to participate in this relationship or not? And if I'm not, if I'm saying, well, I'm not, and people might say, well, I am willing, but they have to, yeah, but that either likely won't happen or probably won't happen. So that's your choice. Your choice is I'm in or I'm not. And what most people will do is, though, they'll say, I'm in and it's going to change. And it doesn't. Or it's got to change. And it doesn't. And so they're kind of in, but not in. I mean, they're actually in, but they're not behaving like they're in. Right? So, and the reality is in a relationship, it's like diving into a pool. You can't dive into the pool and not get wet. So if you're in a relationship, you're in it. Whether you like it or not, you're in it. So you should behave that way, like you're in it. And if you're not behaving like you're in it, then you should get out of the pool. It's that simple. Now, it's that simple in terms of like the reality of it, but it's not that simple in terms of the circumstances of it. Sometimes there's a lot of shit attached to it, like finances and agreements and family and sometimes children and, like just a lot of things can be involved. But it doesn't change the truth. The truth remains the same. And the question you have to ask yourself, and I use it as a question, is, but am I willing to diligently manage myself? In this relationship, am I willing to diligently manage myself? If the answer to that is, and there's only two answers. If the answer is no, you don't have a relationship anyway. You don't have one. You've got some other thing, some arrangement, right? Some agreement. It's not, and it will never be the kind of relationship that you might be pretending that it is. And pretense is a killer because in all the great pretenses of your life, the first one you have to fool is yourself.
You have an entire chapter on the deal breakers, right? So basically, I think that's what we're getting to is deal breakers in a relationship. Those are obviously individual, like what someone is tolerant enough to put up with or what they're not.
Yeah.
But it's really, do you think it's going back to knowing thyself? This is something I'm willing to tolerate. This is something I'm not.
Well, the way I put it in the book is, so when you meet somebody and it's getting really serious and you love them and they love you and, this is all, everybody's free and happy. You might say to that person, listen, the one thing I'll never tolerate is infidelity. Okay. And if you ever cheat, I'm done. Okay. Now, that's not really authentic. What you're really saying to that person is, don't you ever cheat or I'm done. That's what you're really saying. That's the truth of it, right? Because, and then if you really dug deep into the truth, you would say, that would be the most painful thing ever for me because it would mean I'm alone. I like being alone and I'm afraid and I feel rejected and there's layers and layers and layers all the way down there. But the truth of it is a little closer to this, that if ever there was infidelity in a relationship, I'm reserving the right to question whether I'm going to continue with this or not. That's really what it is. And that's way more appropriate because then you'll be like, okay, this has happened. And I'm now questioning whether I'm going to continue giving myself to this, giving my vow or my word to this or not. Now, if I'm saying, and we use infidelity as an example because it's a common example, right? So we use infidelity as an example. If there's been infidelity in a relationship, the old arrangement is in fact over. So whatever you vowed when you got into it, and there's been infidelity, that vow is now over. It's complete, right? And this is where I think a lot of people fall down. They try to rebuild something, and there's nothing to rebuild. It's trashed, right? So you might say, well, however, whatever we did to this point is over. It's complete, and I'm declaring it complete. And that everything that I said I would do with you to this point, I'm now no longer willing to serve that or be that person in this relationship. Okay. However, I am interested in being in a relationship with you. We would both need to deal with that and deal with all the ghosts and skeletons and all the stuff and all the junk and and declare that everything that we were to this point complete. And only when I'm there am I now going to create anything new with you. Part of that new thing is that the old thing's complete. It doesn't belong here. So any grievances or any shit, if you haven't dealt with it there, it'll still be here. But if you have dealt with it, it won't be here. All that will be here is who we said we are now, given all of that. So I invite people to really take on, like, your deal breakers, or when you're now saying this is the space where I'm questioning whether I'm in or not, and if I'm not, then I got to handle it appropriately. But if I am, then there's work you have to do, which I get into in the book, of declaring something complete, of getting to the bottom of something, of finally, like everything that was is no longer. And it's kind of refreshing because it really is like, well, you just get all your cards on the table, and they do the same. All the cards are on the table. And if you're going to build something, then you're building in a whole new plot of land, a whole new thing, a whole new set of vows and agreements and promises, and you live from there.
Man, this was really, really cool. And I've been waiting ever since I interviewed you. I think it was the Stop Doing That Shit. And that's when you alluded to the fact that you had several books that you were working on.
Yeah.
And I remember you actually saying, like, I want to be able to write books that no matter what situation you're in, you can like literally pick out the book, go to the particular chapter, just open it up and get value just right away. And that's what you told me. You're writing a book on relationships, which I thought was awesome. I want to ask you, what are you working on in the next few years beyond even this?
Ooh, Larry.
I know.
Always ask me the question.
I do.
I'm working on right now. I'm up to my eyeballs in a book of this thing called A Parent. So somebody had asked me, have you ever considered to write a parenting book? There's tons of parenting books out there. So it never really fascinated, like, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It's all the same shit, right? Don't be mean and be great, don't repeat the errors of the past. But what really fascinated me is this notion of a parent. Like, what is it? Like, what is a parent? And what does it take for you to constitute yourself as one? Like, what does it take for you to become one? And you can't become the parent that you have in mind or would like to be until you fully see what that thing is for you. Like, what is it for me? What is being a parent for me? Which includes a lot of the past. So in this book about parenting, I'm really taking on, this is the first time I think I've really taken on how to get into your past and handle it. And I'm taking on this thing. I talked about it a little bit earlier in the interview. I'm taking on blame. So without blame, there is no past. Blame is the anchor to everything in your past. So anything you're holding on to from your past, either you're to blame or somebody else is to blame, and that's it. And that's the only thing that keeps it kind of resonating through your life. So, and as I got into it and I started to peel back the layers myself and read about it and study it and write about it, it's such a powerful topic, to free yourself of the very human affection for blame and what it does to your life and how it impacts your ability to be a parent or the kind of parent that you want to be. And so it's a fascinating topic and a little complex, but I'm loving it.
I cannot wait for that one. That's going to be amazing, man. Any word on when you think that might be released, or can you not?
I'm just trying to get the freaking thing written right now. I'm on a tight deadline because I'm heading off to Europe in the summer with a family. So I'm on a tight deadline for it. So I guess it'll be late next year, and that'll be the thing. I've got a great publisher. I've got great people over there, and they really look after me, and they're committed that this work gets out there. So I'm doing what I do usually. That is to make it dense and short. So all my books have that kind of property about it. Like they're dense. There's a lot in them, but they're short.
Yeah.
And that's tricky because sometimes you get a subject and you really want to extrapolate. And so you're kind of looking for things to take out. So there's enough space there for somebody to think. But so far, so good.
That's awesome, man. I can't wait to have you on for the 6th or 7th time, whatever that is. I've lost count. So, man, this was awesome. I want to make sure all the men can find you and your resources. I know you've got like an empire of books at this point.
Yeah.
And more to come. But if people want more and they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can obviously GaryJohnBishop.com. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. I have the Unfuck Nation podcast, which I do, which, you should always make sure your children are not in the car when you're playing it, because, as the title suggests, it's colorful.
Yeah.
And it's language. But yeah, I tend to try and put a lot of content out there, Larry, as you know, just as much as I can to support people and make a difference with people. There's very little around me that I don't just try to get to you daily, like again, Twitter and Instagram. I'm always trying to get stuff out there to make you think and challenge your thinking and allow you to kind of explore your own life.
I like it, man. Not to worry, guys. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for Gary, all of his books, his podcast, his social media. All you have to do is go over to thedadedge.com/369 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/369. Gary, it's always a pleasure, man. It's always so much fun talking to you.
Great, Larry. You're such a great interviewer. It's always very conversational, which I love. And it gives me a chance to talk a lot, which I apparently like too.
Nah, man. Love it. Love it. It's awesome. Gentlemen, really enjoyed today. Like I said, head on over to thedadedge.com/369. Gary, it's always a pleasure, man. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Larry.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.